Ooh,
I can feel it.
the live.
Yes.
Live.
Here we
This is when
are.
the live hits you.
The live hits you. It feels
It's when
great.
it gets you.
God, I can't stop.
You know what we played at the LAN? So we had a LAN party this last weekend. We played Wreckfest, which is a racing game like Destruction Derby. You ever played Destruction Derby on like the PlayStation 1?
Nope. I played, what's that one? Twisted Metal. Is it something like that?
No, it's not like that. No, you're not. You don't have like missiles and
Yeah,
other
right. You're
stuff
just
on
shooting
your car.
people.
No, it's like a racing game, but it's not. It's not like Forza. Oh, hey Quinn, welcome to the show.
What's up, Ryan?
It's not like Forza or something serious. It's like you're supposed to bang into each other. Like the tracks are figure eights and stuff.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
Do you pronounce it is it Forza? Is that
how
how
I
you're
thought
supposed to pronounce it?
How do you, what's the other way to say it?
I thought it was just Forza. Is it Forza? Is it German? Is the word German?
I don't know.
If the word is German, then yeah, I think it would be Forza. But I've only ever heard it pronounced Forza. That's hilarious.
I'm just saying it how I know it. I don't know.
I know, me neither. What the hell? Well, now I'm all screwed up for my whole life. I've only pronounced it Forza.
We're gonna have to get to the bottom of this.
You're probably right. I know nothing about cars or racing, and if it is German, then it's got to be Forza, because Z's are pronounced like T's, I believe. Auf Deutsch. Anyhow, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So go ahead.
No, well, it was the perfect excuse to come back to my house and get the racing wheel and bring it over there. So
Yeah, were you the only one that had one?
yeah, I mean, like some people flew in, they didn't fly in their racing wheels. You know?
Well, what punk ass bitches? Why didn't they do that?
Yeah, what the heck?
Yeah.
We just did there's tracks where essentially the straight part of the track is bi-directional, and then there's like loops at each end.
Okay, the
then
straight
there's, like,
part is by.
Yeah, so there's like people in buses that you got to watch out for. It was a lot of fun.
Damn, that's cool. Wow. Sounds awesome, man. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. That's really cool.
It was crazy. It was we had to be, I think by the end we had to be on 3 or 4 different circuits in Quinn's house to not trip breakers because we had 14 computers.
So did you ever trip one? Did the power ever blow?
Several times, yeah. So I think we started out on 2 separate ones. Oh, here we go. Quinn, here we go. It should be pronounced Forza.
Forza.
Not Forza.
It must be German. It must be. Forza. It's so funny. I mean, I don't know that I would have pronounced all 3 Z's. I think I only pronounced 1 Z. Not like Forza.
Forza, not Forza.
Not Forza. But Forza. I don't think I can do that. I don't think I'm going to do that, but I'll try. I'll try my
Max
hardest.
PCs we were at were 16. All right.
Damn.
All those 4090s really sucking up the power. I don't think anybody had a 4000 series.
4 different circuits. It's no joke. It was no joke. Damn.
That's cool.
Well, should we get the show on the road?
Let's get this show on the road. Well, hello, everyone. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to episode 2 of Session 0. It's our RPG podcast tailored to the beginner DM by 2 beginner DMs. So welcome, everyone. Tonight on the show, later on, we're going to have a special guest. Ryan, who's our guest tonight?
The venerable original Gamecaster. Not that anyone out there listening knows the Gamecasters, but the original Gamecaster himself and hardened RPG veteran Jeremy Peet. And I won't spoil this too much, but he is currently in the midst of designing his own system right now called Bleep, and we'll talk about that much later.
I can't wait to talk to Jeremy. I'm very excited.
Same, man. Wealth of knowledge this guy is. Unlike our guest last week who knew nothing. Luckily, he's not listening now.
So you've been playing it all? I have to say, since our last show, if we do once a month, I should have played 4 or 5 times.
Same.
But we missed one. We did half another one. So at least me, I've been excited to get back to it. I hope the rest of the party has been as well.
I have been pumped as heck to get going. I have a bunch of scenarios in the works for the kids, but we've been so busy we have not played, and we're all twitching We were just twitching when we went live because it was the live was going there. But we're twitching the other way. We're all like, we're all addicted and needing our fix. And we have not been back to it in a while. So I am itching to get into it. Also, before you go on to the next thing, I'm starting a RPG night, I guess it is, with a couple friends of mine. Mick, if you know him, is
Whoa, okay.
He's starting like a group. He's getting an IRL group together. So Mr. Measles and me and some other guys are going over there, and some ladies as well. And we're playing a bunch of different systems. Because dude, he has like 30 books, and they're all of different systems. I'm probably. I don't think I'm saying I'm probably understating it. He has so many different systems that he's never tried. And so we're going to use this group as a way to try all these different systems out.
Okay.
And I'm really pumped. The first one we're going to do, I think he's done before. I think it's called Numenera.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I haven't played it.
Maybe Numenera. I'm not sure. He says it's a little bit of a simpler system than the D&D. And I'm just really pumped to get into it. And so we're going to start that coming up at the end of the month here.
I want to hear... Oh, man. Well, thank goodness we have this show, so we have an excuse for you to report back on your experiences. Yeah. What a crazy group. So here's the thing. If you're going to play all these different systems, which means you're probably going to switch through 1-2 shot short adventures, I imagine. Are you going to then split up are other people going to run the game sometimes?
I think Dave wants to run them all. I think that's his goal. And so in this particular group, I'm going to stretch out and be a player.
Nice.
Which I'm excited about. I do really love the DMing aspect of what I do with the family, but I am excited to also be on the other side of it because I haven't really done that either. So I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that he's going to run. I'm sure if I said to him, "Let me fucking run one," he would. But I'd have to hit the F that hard.
I mean, essentially though, him handing you these, he's gonna have to do a lot of work, right?
Yeah,
he's gonna have to learn a system well enough to run it. You don't have to be an expert on it, but you got to know it somewhat to be able to run it for people when they have questions, because there's no way he can expect you every time to know all the rules as you're coming in.
For sure.
But you just gonna get to show up and get to try all this cool stuff. That's awesome.
It's so cool. I cannot wait. It's gonna be great. Yeah, I think we're starting at the end of the month. We were supposed to start, so I was originally going to have it to talk about this episode. I was really pumped about it because we were supposed to do it, I think, what's today, the 8th? We were supposed to do it a couple weeks ago. And so I was going to have a lot of, but we had to postpone. There was a lot of weather problems in Michigan over the last couple weeks. Remember, we had that bad ice storm, knocked everybody's power out. It was like that time we were supposed to do it. So that kind of all happened. And we rescheduled for later this month. So I will have it to talk about for the next episode, hopefully. But you've been back into it, man. What were you playing just recently?
Well, yeah, so I have found out two things. I am now getting deep enough into it, right? So we started in November. It's now March. So we play roughly once a week. We've skipped a few weeks here or there. And now I'm getting deep enough into it to begin to see the kinds of things I want to get better at. Instead of showing up every time and being a little bit overwhelmed and just trying to keep up with everything that's happening, I'm now essentially, I think I have a little bit of an ability to be this is what I need to improve upon. And there's really two things that have been standing out. One is improvisation. And I thought that would probably be the thing that would come easiest to me, because I feel like I'm pretty good at throwing out something off the cuff. I'm not the kind of person who necessarily prepares a lot ahead of time. So I thought, responding to a situation by making stuff up on the spot would be something I could do. The issue I'm having is I'm running this very dense module, right? And I talked about that a little bit on the last Date Night Thrice podcast about how dense this GUI cube stuff is. And I had a really hard time memorizing the entirety of it to know how to improvise within that space and still try to keep things on track. And so I have found I leaned really heavily on the module for a long time, and now that there's an opportunity and a chance to sort of bring a little bit of it to life, I almost have to do more prep ahead of time to internalize what's happening, or also lean towards some of my own stuff at some point. I think when I get there, when I get to the place where we're doing more of the stuff I'm making up, it'll be a lot I'll be a lot more comfortable improvising in that space than trying to enact characters that are pre-written. If they were pre-written as like a sentence or two, you could sort of like build a character around that very easily. The issue with this module is these characters are built out over like paragraphs and paragraphs,
right,
split in different parts and pieces of the book. There's like the descriptions of where you interact with them in the story, and then there's a whole nother book that gives a couple paragraphs about them in a completely different reference book, and then maybe there's some other like one-off things where you run into these people, and it's like, and then there's like 30 people, and I'm like, I don't know who's who anymore.
And that's this book, this GUI Cube book, is really your first entrance into any of this, right? So I can imagine it's probably gotta be sort of effing with your brain a little bit to all of a sudden now you're like, okay, I'm going to improvise. When before I was looking at this book and reading and taking all of my cues from this book, and now I'm going to try to So I think you still are good at improvisation. It's just how do you shift your brain that has only been for the last 4 or 5 months dug into these GUI Cube books. Now you're kind of forced to pull out because they are almost right. You're almost through the content. Yeah. So
it's almost like if you read a quarter of a novel and then somebody asked you to act out the characters from the book. You'd be like, well, I don't really know them yet. But they're written out so much that I can't just make up whatever I want. If you read half of the first Harry Potter book and then somebody asked you to go around acting like Snape, you could do that after you've maybe read the whole series. But half of the first book, you're like, well,
you'd be making up a lot of...
Not exactly sure what he does.
You'd be supposing a lot of things.
And then completely on the other end, my kids have been playing a little bit. The younger ones, Elsa and Calvin. And I have just been like winging those games, but not off the cuff either. And then I ended up in this weird place where I just like hadn't prepared anything, but I wanted to stay somewhat on the Lost Mines of Phandelver track, and then I had the same problem, where instead of being overwhelmed by information, I just was completely unprepared. Luckily, yep. I don't think they minded.
Well, they probably had no idea,
but I felt like I could have given them a more rich experience than I was giving them. But speaking of your games with your kids, do you have your next session planned and ready? The one you're itching to play?
So I have one that I'm making up completely from scratch, and then I also have one from this box. And so this is a good probably opportunity to talk about this box that I bought. I bought this, or rather I got it for Christmas. It was it's a box. It's called, what's it called? Is it called Dungeon in a Box, I think?
Oh,
you
yeah,
remember?
okay. Yeah,
I think that's what it's called.
It's like a subscription thing normally, isn't it?
Right. And it came with these, it's called Skinny Minis, right? So the whole reason I really initially wanted this was there are, when you're playing a role-playing game, you need to have something that represents all of the things on all the NPCs, the player characters, the monsters, all that kind of stuff. And typically, people use miniatures, right? But then you got to paint all those miniatures, which is a whole other hobby in itself, which we love to do as well. But I saw these acrylic minis on an Instagram ad called Skinny Minis, and I was like, oh man, those look fucking sweet, and they're acrylic, so they're all pre-painted. Yeah, and I was like, I want this. So I told Natalie, my wife, I was like, I want these. If you're gonna give me something for Christmas, some big thing, give me this. And it was like, it was a few $100, right? But it was like a ton of stuff. What I didn't know that it came with were all of these one-shot modules. Yeah. And they are basically a little pamphlet, and the pamphlet inside of it has a one-shot story. Boom. And it's all 5th edition, I think. It's supposed to really, really map onto 5th edition. I think you looked at it, Ben, and you kind of said that as well.
It had the classic, when it would say a monster name, it was bolded, which means go look it up in the monster manual.
Go look it up in the monster manual, right. So what I'm doing is I'm just literally only taking the narrative parts of it, and I am just adapting it to the system I play, Tiny Dungeon, And I mean, I'm completely bastardizing it, but it is saving me a ton of prep and story building. And I just drop it into this little world that I created. Like, for instance, the last one we did, there was this town, and everybody in this town was just disappearing, almost like they were Thanos snapped away. And nobody knew why. And it turned out there was this other plane where they were being transported to, and then there was this monster there who was like eating them once they got there. And so there was all these different ways that it happened in this little pamphlet that I was like, I don't know how the heck I would do that for my system. So I just said, you know what? I like the story. I'm just going to kind of steal the story from this pamphlet and input the characters that are here. I'm going to make up the monsters myself. And it was great. It was so great. I ended up making up. So there was this giant. I think of the fire giant from Elden Ring. Okay. And he was like the big bad that was kind of eating everybody. So he's up high on this mountain, and he would come down from the mountain, and if he didn't get a human sacrifice, he would take somebody to this other plane and then eat them. And the party has to like go up to his, castle, find a way to trip the plane of existence to get into this other plane. And it was just really fun for the kids to, kind of just figure out what to do. And I just kind of let them do whatever the heck they wanted. I was like, okay, yeah, he wants to. I didn't have him sacrifice a child. It was like there was an animal. He likes to eat bunnies, basically, is kind of what it was, right? So then they're like, we don't want to give him the bunny. And it was like, okay, you're not going to give him to him. And so then I made up this thing that he like transported everybody to the other plane, and now they had to fight him. And in the book, in the pamphlet, it was an actual, like you said, like a monster from the monster manual. And so he had all these abilities and all these, I don't know what a stat block is, but he had all these stat blocks or something that went with 5th edition. And so what I did, I just threw all that out the window, and I was like, I made it so he had this giant like crystal on his back. And once they found that, he was impervious to damage until they found that. They eventually found that. He was really slow, so he like swung his sword and like bent over. And Cameron's like, can I jump on his back? And I was like, you can. And when you do, you find this giant like gem. And he was like, oh, I'll hit the gem. When he hit the gem, it like the two planes sort of like kind of became one, and all the people that were disappearing were coming back, and it was damaging this giant. And that none of that was in the pamphlet, you know what I mean? So it was just an example of I took it and brought it over. So I have another one of those pamphlets that I'm going to take and adapt. And then I have another story that I'm just going to kind of do on my own. But that one will take longer to prep. These Dungeons in a Box ones are just quick ones that I can just pull out and read through in 2 seconds, and then we're off.
That's cool.
Really cool. Yeah.
How much work is it for you to come up with monsters for a tiny dungeon? Like if you're like, oh, this Dungeon in a Box 5e thing has, this monster, and this monster. I'm going to use those same acrylic minis, but I'm going to come up with a monster for dungeon in a tiny dungeon. Good
question. Luckily, Tiny Dungeon has a bunch of monster types in the core rules. And I have the actual playing cards that have what the monsters are, so I can just kind of thumb through this deck and pick one out. So there in that example, there was these, I don't even know what the heck there was a name of this monster in this pamphlet I'd never heard of before. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know what it could have looked like. Didn't have a picture. And so I was like, okay, that's going to be a goblin. And, there's like a goblin type character in the Tiny Dungeon. And so I just swapped it out and just said, okay, instead of these, they're going to be these goblins.
Okay.
And they're going to fight these. So that's what I'll do. I'll just kind of thumb through the deck and be like, okay, this is going to be a lionkin. That's
so you're like 1-to-1 swapping with a Tiny Dungeon monster that you
pretty much
have. You're not having to like build one from scratch.
No, I've done that a couple of times. One time I had them fight this giant spider, and I pretty much created that from nothing. But it was easy enough to just be like, okay, one of its attacks is it's going to shoot poisonous webs, and then if it hits you, it's going to do poison damage, it's going to grapple them, and it was like easy enough for me to just do that. And that's what I like about this, I think, the most. Ben, is that I'm just kind of doing it all off my brain, and the kids are like, "Oh no, a poison spider! Oh crap!" You know, I don't have to be like, "Yeah." They're like, "Can I run, jump off the wall and pierce it right through the in the mandible or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yes, do that." And there's not like these rules I have to follow, and it just makes everything. That makes all the moments, which is the reason that we play these so much better.
Well, one of the things I was most afraid about with running a D&D campaign, a D&D game, was coming up with combat encounters for the players. And that was one of the things that initially sort of attracted me to the GUI Cube module. Was they were like, no, all the encounters are built, and actually in the reference book you have encounters, and then you actually have difficulty levels for the encounters where you can turn them up. And not only that, they wanted it's essentially like a standalone thing. You could, with the player's handbook, you could then run this module because it has all the stat blocks. It doesn't require the monster manual at all.
What is a stat block, real quick? What is that?
It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just the information on a monster. So it's the health, its stats, its abilities, its actions, everything.
All of that together is called a stat block. That
box is the stat block. Like that essentially, other than a piece of art, that is what makes a monster unique, right?
Right.
Here's everything about the monster. And so I was all worried about, like, I don't know how to make or balance encounters or what they should fight or whatnot. And I'll tell you what, now, a few months into it, that is probably one of my favorite things to do, is actually make up encounters, because you get a pretty good feel after a little while about, like, what the players are capable of. And you're not necessarily looking for balance, right? This isn't Descent. If you think about the old Descent, where there's like a bad guy versus the good guys, this isn't Star Wars Imperial Assault, where like one side or the other can win. In D&D, you want it to be dangerous. People can die, but in almost every fight, the heroes are going to win, right? That's not a balanced game. And so your job is not to make a balanced experience. It is to make a fun challenge. And now that I've realized that, I find it a lot of fun to make combat encounters. The one thing I have found that I've struggled with then is actually running them, because what I didn't realize is I'm not a very good tactical wargamer.
Yeah.
And I should have realized that, because I've played Warcry before. I've played other tactical games, and I'm not very good at them. I'm not. And now I am the antagonist to the players.
You have to be the one that's difficult for them to tactically defeat.
Exactly. And some of them are very good tactical wargamers, and I am not. And so that is the thing that I'm seeing now. Like in our most recent game, we had one combat encounter the entire session. It was more like heavy RP. And that combat encounter, I had a ton of fun building. I took two separate encounters from the module. One where they can come across this like goo thing in the mud, and another one where they can get assaulted by these reptile guys. And I was like, what if the reptile guys know about the goo thing? And it's in this big kind of open area where the wagon can get trapped between like two edges of the forest by this like wetland area, and then that's where the goo monster is. And then they know that that's there, and they oftentimes use it to take out travelers to then like rob from them or kill them or whatever. And so they ambushed them and trapped them in this thing, and then they woke up the goo monster. And like I was like, oh, this is going to be so cool. But then looking back on it, this is where I think I'm beginning to get a little bit better. I'm not just saying, oh, I didn't do that very good. After the session, I thought, here's some things I probably could have done differently to make it a little bit more challenging. Here's ways I can like trigger, let's say, the fighter's reaction, get it wasted on some like trash mob, so that it doesn't keep like smashing down the more important, pieces of the combat encounter. Right? Stop giving them like free shots on the guys who are like the glass cannon or the like artillery units, and like use the infantry to get in their way and slow them down and die, because that's what pawns are for, right?
Yep, right.
Like, sacrifice them to set up the attacks with the other thing. And I need to get better. I need to get better at that. And it's like not something that you practice in your free time, but hopefully over time I'll get a little bit better and have it be a little bit more dynamic.
We could do that. You could practice that. You could set up a bunch of tactical combat situations, and then we just, on stream, I just try to break them.
That would be, or we just, not even that, we just talk through it.
Right, that sucks. Screw that.
We could even set up the same sort of like thing and be like, okay, here is the combat scenario that we had, and here's what the players did. Like, what could we have done? Like, how could I get better
through it
in this
like
situation?
game film. Like, you record it, you go through it like game film. Like, you're watching back the team that destroyed you. How do you build better plays? Heck yeah, man, that sounds great. I would do that in a second. That sounds awesome. It would take longer than that, but that sounds fun.
Okay, but you know what? So all this is like I'm talking about like practicing, about getting better, about like work. You're talking about like digging through a bunch of things you bought to try to like find something you want to run and prepare and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about Mick learning all these rules. So like, what is it? Why are we doing this? Why do we have the bug? What has happened to us? Why have we stopped reading board game rule books all the time and trying to force everybody we know to play them? And why are we doing this? What happened?
I think I can answer. I have no fucking clue. No, I'm just kidding. I think I can answer. I have a good BS answer. So, okay, what I loved so much about video games, which is how I started, because I played every video game going back to, the Commodore 64, for crying out loud. I had every system ever. That was my thing. And I loved just playing the game part. I just loved the story and figuring out the game, and I could get lost in it. And it was the first thing that really just kind of completely took me away, in a way that even reading books sometimes didn't do. I was more engaged physically, and it was stimulating, and I loved that. And then when I found board gaming, what I loved about board gaming, I felt like almost more than video gaming, and part of it was probably because of the stage I was in my lifetime. I wanted to connect with people more, and video games didn't really give me that ability. I missed that. And so in board gaming, I was like, okay, now I can connect with people. But most of the games I gravitated to were like hardcore strategy, type stuff, where it's like, okay, I really want to use my brain, and, I'm with people, but I still really need to like heavily think about how I'm going to win. And that was kind of a decent chunk of my gaming life. And now I feel like I'm kind of moving away from that. Maybe I've done that. I've tried that now. And I really want, because it's so different from video gaming. And RPGs almost kind of marry them together a little bit more, because now I'm not just thinking about, here's what I want to do to win, here's the strategy I need to employ, here's the rules I have to manipulate. It's more like I get the shared connection of talking to people, and we get to have these amazing story moments and this great fun in a way that board games can't really give me. Or I've found that they haven't been able to give me just in these short months that I've been role-playing. I'm finding it... I used to think that it was kind of cringe, like, oh, we're going to get together and pretend to tell a story.
We're going to play pretend.
Narrative in board games, I hate it. I think it's terrible. But this has turned out so much more fun than I ever would have thought. And I think it's because of the pressure's off for my brain for thinking, and it's literally only about having a good time. You know what I mean? It takes away that stress component of like, I'm competitive. I like being competitive, but that's all board gaming is for me lately, is just, it's competition. And going to something like an RPG, it takes that completely out of it. And the cooperative aspect is even, it's not even like a cooperative board game, it's even better than that, because I'm telling this story. And and on top of that, dude, I get to be creative. I get to be the one that creates this world that we're living in, and coming up with these stories and watching my kids all come together and enjoy the story. And I don't know. To me, that's what the bug is. That's how the bug's gotten me. But I know that's got to be different a little bit different for you.
Well, and it's when you're playing with your kids, you're really put in a position of in a good position too. I think of you're in charge of like making the fun.
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily having to present a pre-generated experience like a board game and be like, I like this. I think you'll find fun in this too. It's like you get to actively mess with the experience to make sure that it's fun.
Yeah,
right?
I'm the designer.
You tailor it to their experience right in front of them, and then you're like, I'm gonna make it so this is fun. Plus, kids love telling stories. Like,
Absolutely.
it's so it marries so well.
Well, because
with
they get their
kids.
own agency in it, and they don't have to just be like, okay, tell me the rules, and I have to play according to the rules. The rules are like, do whatever you want, and I'll tell you how to do it. And so to me, it reminds me of almost like a shared improv kind of a storytelling. It's all improv. And it's just fun to see, like, to riff off of each other. Because that's kind of what happens, is everybody just kind of riffs off of each other. And it creates this almost like this atmosphere, this energy that you get when you're, like, in a comedy club, or you're, like, seeing a show. It gives me that same kind of energy. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, man, I'm doing this. And they're feeding off of that. And it's, like, gives me a high. And then I see them do it together. They're, like, talking to each other and coming up with these ideas that are so like I never would have thought of that. Holy crap, that's awesome! And then they do, and I get to see that, and it's like, man, my narcissism comes out because I'm like, I did that. I made that, and look at this is doing. Yeah, it's freaking
Look at how
sweet.
great that is.
Look how great that thing is.
I think for me, I am just the kind of person who loves having a project, and I particularly like stuff that's hard. Right? It's why a long time ago I was like, I'm gonna run a marathon, and I loved working up towards being able to do it. And I just loved that I got to that point more, and then over recent years, it was like, I'm going to try and see how strong I can get. I'm going to get as strong as possible. And then that was all I thought about for a little while. And so I really have enjoyed my time playing RPGs over the past few years. It was great. I was just very intimidated by the idea of trying to run one.
Yep.
When I finally took the plunge of the simple text message of saying, why don't I run the next game? And everybody was like, yeah, sure. And it was like, all of a sudden it was a project.
Yep, now I gotta do this.
Yeah, and maybe at the end of the campaign, that is a finish line. But in the meantime, until then, and probably after, because who knows, we'll play other stuff, and maybe other people will run games, and I'll run games again. And for now, it is something that however hard I want to work on it, I can. There's no limit to the amount of effort I can put in, because I can either be working on creating the next pieces of the adventure, like you're talking about putting together the next story, right? I can be working on preparing both the written stuff and then some of the other things I'm going to include. And like, what is the limit to that? I can twist in any amount of stories that I want. I could go into the module and completely destroy all the encounters and rebuild them and tailor them more to the player's experience. Now, I haven't done that. But my point is, as hard as you want to work on it, you can.
Yep.
And then, if you play every week, you sort of like are thrown in the fire a little bit. And it's always interesting of like how different I find those two experiences to be. The difference between the prep time, which is all this like creative energy and like trying to imagine what might happen, and then on the other hand, actually being in the situation of like having to respond to what is happening, and they're like almost like two completely different things, and you get to work on this one during this time, and then you have to and then it's showtime, trying to keep up with them tactically, which I'm not doing a very good job of, right? Like that kind of stuff. Well, okay, well then I could get better at playing tactics, right? I need to play it more like XCOM and stop playing it like the way I played Warhammer when I sucked at it.
Well, yeah, so it's a lot more dynamic, where board games are a lot more static. A board game, you learn the rules, and you have a little space in these rules that you can live in and operate into, and you're kind of like pinging and ponging back and forth. And an RPG, I found, is just limitless. You're in outer space, and it's endless, and it's dynamic. And every single session, you have to kind of be ready for what is going to happen this time. And that's exciting. That's just generally exciting that, again, you don't get in something like a board game. In a board game, there's not often, I'm not trying to dog on board games when I have a freaking board game podcast, and I love board games. But like, I just played Brass Birmingham. And I thought it was
because it hit number 1.
Great. Yeah. So, well, okay. So I bought it when it was number 2. It hit number 2, which is still crazy. And so I bought it. I was like, I should probably play this thing. We never played it. And then it hit number 1, and I was like, all right, we got to play this thing.
That's great.
And I'm going to review it on the next episode of the Gamecasters. But I played it, and I was like, this is really good. Like, this is really good. But it's funny now, after having been so immersed in RPGs, I'm like, it's so limiting. It's so, you just can't do... it's really cool. What it does within the rule set is very good. It does it very good. But I find myself missing okay, here we are on an island in the middle of the river, and there's these people, and you don't know what they're going to do, and what are you going to do? And then your players could say anything. They can say anything. Whatever they say, you got to kind of pretend like you knew they were going to say that. And here's what happens when they say it. And I love that. It's like electrifying.
Well, and being a beginner, I feel like we're on the steep slope of improvement, right? You can because you know so little, everything you learn is like a big percentage more increase, right? So it's this extremely steep slope of how much better you're getting, and I love being in that position. And it's the kind of place where if I was plateaued at the top and I was actually good at something, that's where judgment gets dangerous, because I have now invested my identity into something, right? I have worked so hard at this to get to a place that I am feigning competency, let's say, and then when I fail there, it's like, wow, that was as hard as I worked and then failed. But when I'm on this upward trajectory, when we're constantly improving, I love the feedback of like learning something, trying something, failing, and knowing that's something you can go work on, because I like recognize that I'm in that space of improvement still. It's not perfect, right? I'm not saying that I don't get down on myself and be like, God dang, I screwed that up. That was so dumb. Like, everybody hated that. I hope it's not just me. I hope every dungeon master struggles with those same kind of things of like every single game session we ever have. I go, well, that's stupid.
Sucked.
That sucked. I screwed all those parts up.
How could you not? You are essentially creating a game experience from, you have the Greek Cube modules, but still you're doing this on the fly. You are a game designer on the fly. You have to be like, okay, you did this, then I think I'll do that. And sometimes it's like that didn't work at all. I had a session with my niece and nephew. At the end of it, I was like, in my head, I was like, that was amazing. You guys all loved that, right? And my nephew was like, God, if we could have just fought 99% less than that, I would have had a great time. And I was like, okay. And it was hard to take, but I went back to that and I was like, okay, like you said, internalize. And it's like, okay, what do I do next time? Because not everybody feels the same way. So how do you strike that balance between, okay, my nephew does not want combat, he wants RP, but my son just loves bashing shit with his sword, and he likes that. He prefers that to RP.
Well, it all depends if your nephew's going to be there every time. If you have a week over week thing, then you can tailor different weeks to different people. But if it's like he's going to be there every once in a while, it's like, well, sometimes it's going to suck, I guess.
Well, even in your group, I'm sure there's people who are more prone to the role play and other people who are more prone to tactical combat, right? Yeah. Striking a balance has got to be crazy. I mean, you're playing such a complex system, and mine is so simple, which, if you don't mind, is a segue.
Yeah, well, what a wonderful segue into our next discussion topic, where we would like to, before Jeremy gets here and can talk actually from an educated place on this, we want to discuss our feelings on simple rule sets versus complex rule sets, and sort of there's a gradient there, right?
Yeah, it's on it's in a spectrum. There's some sort of spectrum. So if you haven't known, so Ben, one of the two of us here who is starting this DM experience, is doing D&D 5th edition, right? Which is probably more of on the complex side of RPG systems. Maybe some people out there are like, ha, D&D complex. Yeah, right. I know it's really complex. I don't know. I'm doing the simplest. If Ben's up here, I'm down here. In tiny
I would
dungeon.
say on the spectrum of RPGs, D&D is on the higher end because it is a military combat simulation. Not to an extreme degree. It's not a war game, but it's based on war games, and a lot of those mechanisms are still there.
Sure. So he's running the complex D&D system with books upon books and content and rules, and I'm running a system on a small book of like 2 pages of rules. Both of these are about immersion and storytelling and roleplay, but they're very different, both in the amount of preparation and as well as execution, right? So I kind of thought about it and I said, like, when you're starting out GMing like we both are, I feel like it's a good idea to figure out what type of system you want to run. What are you looking to get out of your experience as a GM? For me, I wanted to be able to play with my family and kids, keep the rules extremely light, and basically, like I said before, be an improv group with a very loose system that they can engage in so it still feels like they're playing a game, but the mechanisms and lore and threads to pull come behind a thrilling nightly experience. So for me, I landed on a really cool system that I love called Tiny Dungeon. The rule set's extremely simple. The core book is short and has some monsters and treasures you can implement, but mostly it leaves it up to you to create the world and the lore that the players are playing in. For me, that's perfect because I love that side of things. I love creating the world for the kids to play in and write a little scenario and let them go. It gives me the opportunity to be creative, which we talked about a minute ago, and the freedom to explore whatever we want, which has made for some really cool moments, right? So what, Ben, do you love about the complex side of things?
I think it feeds into a lot of that stuff I was talking about the bug, right? I want something that is deep. Like the thing, like with D&D, there's so much that when I decided to be a dungeon master and started looking into the options for what I could learn to be a better dungeon master, then the possibilities are so big. You could go down learning about stuff that applies to all RPGs, like improv, like storytelling, like all the kind of stuff that like makes it feel like this is a good narrative. Or you can go down the path of like learning how to build a dungeon, how to build a monsters encounters, how to run the monsters, how to tailor them to the players, and then you could read through books about all the different mechanisms and how they all work. But I really think why a game like D&D, the complexity level of a D&D, is working for like my game group, I think it really has to do less with the DM and more with the players. Right? Complexity level a lot of times is more about what is going to satisfy what the players want. So trying to play D&D with my kids who don't necessarily understand the progression system or all the rules, like D&D is a really bad option compared to like what you're doing with Tiny Dungeons, right? They want to have a fun story, and let's not get hung up on the rules.
Right.
The adult group that I play with, they want a story. Everybody wants different things, and I'm not going to assume or make assumptions about what they want. But like, let's say me as a player, right? I want to be a hero. I want to start as a peasant or a guy a priest at a church or whatever, and I want to become a fantasy hero by the end. And I need a rule set that's going to offer me that progression and that experience. And so that's where, like, okay, well, then you're going to have a player character that has all these ability options. You're going to have all these options and all this huge leveling system. And what is going to make any of that matter? We're going to have monsters that have all kinds of different abilities and strength levels and complexity and numbers of monsters and like things they can do, and then they have spells, and then there's this whole book of spells, and like the way that combines together is not necessarily like building a fun experience for the dungeon master, though there is some fun in that, right? And I talked about it's really fun to build complex monster encounters that challenge the players. I think that is very fun as a dungeon master. But the only fun the players are having is either through a great story, which is a hard sell a lot of times for outsiders looking in, like you were saying earlier, right? I don't want to go play pretend with my friends.
Right.
But if you're like, I want to go pretend that I'm the Witcher, I liked that video game. Well, think about all the abilities that you have in The Witcher 3 that you can level up into. You can go down the alchemy path or the magic path or a sword master or whatever. So you need to have this rule system in place for a player to be able to feel like they're progressing through some sort of system, and then they see some bad guy come in and cast Disintegrate on somebody, and it does like some insane amount of damage, and if it reduces them to 0, their body like turns to ash and blows away.
Right.
And the best that they can do is like light a candle with their magic, and they're like, whoa. Like, when do I get that powerful? You know, we had an experience like that in our game. We had, I think everybody was level 2 or 3, and they went out with a 6th level spellcaster who cast Fireball. Fireball does 8d6 in a 20-foot radius circle.
Damn.
It killed, you know, and they're doing stuff that's like 2d6 or like a 1d8 damage and to one enemy. And then they see this higher level spellcaster annihilate the entire combat encounter with one spell. And even Dylan at our table, who's a first-time player, he said, "Oh, now I understand where the spellcasters go." He's like, "I didn't realize where we're headed, right?" And so I think that's the advantage that a complicated rule system offers. It's player option. It's player progression, and it's player option.
Absolutely. Man, I couldn't have said that better. But okay, I did some research.
All right.
Because I wanted to nail down exactly what we mean when we say complexity. So you just kind of hit on a lot of different points here. But the word complex could kind of mean a lot of different things, right? Simple is simple. There's just not that much to it, right? Complex could mean... And you get this in board games as well. When someone says, you know, how heavy is this game? What's the complexity? What do you actually mean there? So I found this article written by, his name is Brian Gleichman, back in 2002, and it's called The Elements of Complexity. And I kind of wanted to reference it and go over and just kind of talk about this for a minute, which is pretty cool.
2002?
2002, yeah, it's an old one. He goes into the different aspects, and I still think it holds up. He goes into the different aspects of what he thinks makes something complex. I found this on RPG.net. So he specifically talks about 3 different aspects of complexity. Complexity of implementation, mass, and concept. So for complexity of implementation... he says that this is how difficult the actual mechanical steps are. So an example is roll 1d8, add 1 for every point over 12 in the character's strength. Subtract these points from the target's hit points. And then the other example is, okay, determine which body location on the target was struck, then take the weapon's penetration factor and subtract the armor rating for that location, multiply the result by the weapon's impact factor, which results in the final damage potential, divide the damage potential by the target's location structure points to get the damage ratio, cross-reference that ratio on the ballistic impact chart to determine the wound level and final effect. Right, so yikes. So some people love games with high implementation complexity. Some people like that, he says. There are entire websites devoted to characters worked up in Hero, H-E-R-O, it's an acronym. So while others spend days designing vehicles for their GURPS campaigns, as Quinn talked about last time. And much of this seems to be inspired by the joy of creating something and in the mastery of the method. Yet another common draw for this type of complexity is found in the desire of some people to model in detail specific elements of the game. Not content with the typical high level of abstraction used in many games, they want to see more detailed influences and a more detailed breakdown of events. And I can understand that. I can understand, you know, when I'm playing my game with the kids and, you know, Cameron's like, I'm going to jump up and slice his head off. And I'm like, okay, roll 2 d6s, and on a 5 or a 6, you succeed. You know, that's like so abstracted, pulled way back, right? Some people are like, I unsheath my sword, and in doing that, I'm gonna have to roll, you know, to see how quickly I can get it out, and you know what I mean?
Well, or even a real example, right, of like in D&D, especially like new player, they might be like, okay, I want to go up and cut that guy's head off, and it's like, oh, well, you can't. You could roll to see if you hit him at all. You know, unless you have a vorpal sword, it's not going to cut his head off. So
right, you might not even hit this guy. So that's the idea behind complexity of implementation. He also talks about complexity of mass, which says rules may be simple to implement in every case, However, there may be a large number of very specific cases that each have their own simple rule. So an example here, he says, is the system defines all one-handed weapons as doing 1d8 points damage with a +1 strike and +1 initiative bonus. And the other example says, this system defines 50 different one-handed weapons, each with their own specific damage. 1d3 to 1d20 range, with strike and initiative bonuses independently ranging from +0 to +3. So very simple in terms of how you implement those rules, but there's a million different variations of those.
And
right?
I say that goes back to the player option that I was talking about, right? That's where there's like some fun there, is that you in the moment, how you are playing your whatever you have in front of you is straightforward, but the system's complexity provides options, not necessarily simulation through complexity.
Exactly. So that's the complexity of mass there. And then it says, he kind of went into, he said, why would anyone want to deal with pages upon pages of rules like this? And two reasons come to mind. And he says, first, some people love options and different ways to approach things. How often does one hear something like, my last character was a paladin, I think I'll run a wizard this time? The best way to highlight options is to include them in the rules, and this produces a simple relationship. More options means more pages of rules, right? Just the massive more stuff you have, the more rules there's going to have to be. The very rules themselves become a reason to expand play. For example, include an extensive set of castle building mechanics, and someone's going to play with them just to do something different. You have them in there, and people are going to do them. Other people like pride of mastery. It's difficult to master a lot of rules, he says, and even more difficult to keep them all at your fingertips. To some, knowing the rules and using them to achieve a desired outcome is a source of satisfaction. You know, I've seen a couple videos played where somebody's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And he's like, actually, I think because of this rule, I can do this. You know, and that exploitative factor of like, I figured it out,
right?
Kind of gives you a little bit of a rush feeling, almost like in a board game way. I could think like, oh, I just exploited this rule that was buried under, you know, on page 235, and it's going to be appropriate to use here, and man, does that feel good. So the last element of complexity is complexity of concept. And he says, these are games with few rules. The rules are very simple. Still viewed as complex in the extreme, though, with uncounted possibilities that take even the greatest of players years to master. So his example is something like chess, right? Mechanically, it is one of the simplest rule sets there is. You can move a piece, you know, one space.
Right.
But which piece do you move? You have 8 pawns. Which pawn do you move? What will the effect of that pawn move be? There's questions that are far easy to do, but far difficult to answer, right? How and what to do. In one sense, all RPGs, he says, rate high in this area due to their open-ended nature. And he tends to limit those games where the player is presented with a wide number of options under conditions that require a great deal of thought in order to find an optimal choice. Games with complex tactical environments like Heavy Gear, I don't know if you heard of that, top the list here.
I don't know, though, that I necessarily... Now, I'm going to throw opinions around.
Yeah, rip it off.
I don't know that I necessarily want that kind of experience in my RPG, because you're not replaying scenarios like a chess game. You know what I'm saying? It's the constant new experiences being thrown at you make it so that you never really master any situation, because most situations it's your first time there. And it depends the length of the RPG, how much sameness you want to bring to your interaction with its rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally do. But I could also, on the other hand, see a situation where it would be fun to be like, okay, let's come back to it tomorrow, and I can play this. I don't have to remember a ton of rules for the next session, but I can do a million different possibilities. There's a million different possibilities to do within this one rule set. I could see that being an interesting and fun way to play. So in contrast to all of that, a simple system pretty much has none of these things. Tiny Dungeon, for instance, has players roll 2d6s for almost every single thing you test for. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you succeed. If a situation calls for something where either you have mastery over something, or it's an easy test where whatever reason I choose, you can roll 3d6s for advantage. Likewise, if it's something challenging or you're not proficient in it, you only roll 1d6. You still succeed on a 5 or a 6. The story in a simpler rule set seems to take center stage here in more of a macro view, where it seems like all of the complexity here is more for a micro view, which Ben kind of talked about a few minutes ago, where if you want to, you can just get into the nitty gritty. I'm going to sit down and read this book on how to operate this vehicle, and I'm going to know this vehicle inside and out.
It's funny that GURPS Vehicles was brought up, because when I searched like most complex RPGs, a couple were named, and then GURPS Vehicles was always in there.
That's so funny. That's so funny. But yeah, so if you want to get into all of that kind of things, there exists the D&Ds, and I don't know a bunch of I just don't know a bunch of other heavy systems. GURPS apparently is one of them. And then if you want something simpler, like I've been wanting with my kids, where it's really just about story, I kind of create the whole thing, and it's just like an improv, show. There exists systems for this. There are reasons other than who you're playing with as well to determine whether or not you want to play a simple versus complex system, I feel like. And I think the biggest one is time. Right? For example, I can sit down for an hour and write up a simple scenario to take my family through the next night for a couple hours. Bingo, bango. Done. Right?
Right.
I don't have to wrestle with stat blocks and rules and how vehicles maneuver. I can just basically make it all up and have them roll to see if they succeed, and it's so much fun. I get those moments that I crave. But maybe I have more time to pour into the little intricacies of the world, get down to the small micro level I talked about, detail that makes the world really come alive and immerse me more. Because I can only imagine the complexity trade-off there is you can just get more immersed in the story.
I'm curious, so what are you interested in right now? You have all these games you're going to go play with Dave Mick. You're running what I think we'll call a simple game for your kids. Like, what are you interested in doing? Are you interested in running a more complex system? Are you interested in playing in a more complex system? Or do you like this, let's make the rules easy and stick to storytelling?
Yes, the latter. I feel like with board games, for instance, it was a lot of cerebral, okay, I got to remember all these rules, I got to play within the rule system, and now what I'm wanting out of my gaming is more of I just want to kind of let whatever happen and say yes and have fun and laugh and so being able to be creative, which I haven't been able to really do in board gaming, I can actually be super creative here and create this world. And actually, when we talk to Jeremy in just a minute here, he's the one that got me into creating this world. This world that I've made for the kids, which I call Godriel, was all because of Jeremy and his prompting for that. So I get to do that, and then I get to just kind of create and make up this little story and play with the kids. And I feel like I'm playing Mario Kart, and you're playing Forza.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and let's get Jeremy in here, because I do on my comment on that is I feel like unless you're trying to get people to debug for D&D, specifically D&D, I think D&D is a very bad system for a one-shot. And Jeremy specifically showed me that a simpler system can be a lot more fun for one-shots, and it's made me want to play a system like his or a Tiny Dungeon or whatever, and like try to put together just like a one-night thing to be like, hey, do you guys want to try RPGs? Like, let's do this instead. Where then we'll save these big systems for our multi-year, giant campaigns.
Yeah,
that are more about player progression and all that stuff.
Well, good call, man. I think the time has come for us noobs to stop noobing all over the place. Let's talk to an expert.
You got that right.
The real reason we're all here is to learn. Let's learn a thing or two with the veteran in the RPG space for many, 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 many years. And I say many years because this guy's got to be in his 60s at this point. Welcome to the show, the OG Gamecaster himself, Jeremy Peet. How are you doing, my friend? How's it going?
Doing well. Happy to be here, guys.
Yeah, man.
I love your show. I've watched all the episodes.
all one episodes of us. Yeah. For those of you who don't know Jeremy, he has been playing D&D since he was a wee babe, so we're talking 70, 80 years back. He started with the original Red Box D&D set and has played all manner of heavy and complex rule set. Oh, he's got it right there. The original, that's the OG.
This is the original book that I played.
No shit. Wow, that's crazy.
Awesome.
He's played all sorts of rule sets, complex rule sets. However, as he's gotten older, and I really want to emphasize older, he has gone the more simplistic rule set route.
Very much focusing on that.
Even going as far as designing his own system called Grit. And I want to ask you a few questions specifically as it relates to heavy, complex systems versus simpler, complex systems. That's kind of what we're talking about here.
You guys have covered a lot already. I don't know how much I want to help you.
Oh, like Ben said before, you have the actual knowledge. We have this is what we think might happen.
Right. I'm just making stuff up after playing your game. So.
yeah, exactly.
Which was a ton of fun, by the way. It was awesome. I really thank you for that experience, and I can't wait till we get to do it again, actually.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys jumping in and playing the game, just not knowing anything about it, and it went well, so I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was awesome. And actually, if you can tell us a bit about what is Grit. Tell us about Grit.
Well, it's a streamlined system, on the simpler end of things, but not absolutely simplistic.
Sure.
So I've taken elements of D&D, other games that I've played over the years, decades, and just created something that I felt like I wanted to run and play.
Yeah.
So it's very, very easy to learn, very easy to run, and very easy to play. And it's really built for just short arcs. So like one shots, and from 2 to 5 sessions.
Oh, okay. So you kind of have not necessarily a campaign, but maybe a 5-session arc.
Yes. Well, 5 session would be kind of the max. You could run it longer, and I'm going to add suggestions on how to do that. But it's really designed to be for short arcs.
That's cool, man.
So,
well, let me ask you this. Why did you personally make the switch? Because you just showed us that D&D Redbox rulebook that you started with, and you played that for years, right? Look at that thing. Man, that's cool. It's still in pretty good shape, too, I must admit.
Yeah, it's the pages are getting a little dry.
They're getting dry. But why did you make the switch from a complex system like a D&D to the much simpler system of ICRPG or Grit?
To be honest, that happened a long time ago. Actually, that happened almost immediately.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that happened, back in the early 80s. So I think, I started in 81, 82, and as soon as I started running it, I was a kid. I was 8, 9 years old, running D&D. It was by necessity to kind of just hack D&D to be simpler to run, because it was just too complicated for a kid.
Well, and the previous editions of the game are more complex than where it is now, even, right? So
more complex in different ways. I think they're both complex, but yeah, it was. If you get into advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I played first edition. That was just unplayable if you played it strictly by the rules.
Really?
Yeah, you have to understand it. Gygax, he's a war gamer. He's a tabletop war gamer.
Okay.
And so that fed what D&D became, right? So what you're seeing play through the years is that, it has that roots of being a tabletop tactical board game or tactical game, right? So
sure.
So a lot of that was kind of just baked into the original rules of advanced D&D. So there was stuff in there that was just it was just way too complicated. There was speed factors for weapons. You'd have to break things down into different periods of time within a turn. I think there was 10 different sections, something like that.
So it wasn't like a minute of time was like an encounter or something like that?
Well, each turn or each round it was supposed to be broken down in a certain way, and then speed factors factored into each particular weapon. So faster weapons would go before slower ones, and then magic would happen at a different time. It's just very, very complicated. In addition to, all the charts and stuff you had to roll.
And so you saw that early on, and you were like, no, I don't want any part of this. I want to make it simple.
Well, you're seeing that with your kids. They're just so creative and in the moment, and it's like so easy to just roll one die and like something happens, and like then they're along, into the story and not really worrying about the mechanics so much.
Like what they are able to do is not based on their character sheet; it's based on their imagination.
Exactly, and that's what we did. I mean, we just saw, these are cool dice, and like, my dagger is a D4 damage or whatever, and that's it. There wasn't like a whole lot more than that.
You're not playing a war game on the side, right?
Yeah, but as I got older and got more involved with AD&D, I started to really see it was just so clunky, and so probably by high school I was playing other games.
Okay, like what other games were you playing?
Well, it went into Palladium Systems, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ninja Super Spies.
Are these all RPGs?
Yes, there's a bunch, but a lot of them were still complex. Really, they weren't like the simple ones you see.
Well, I wonder if was D&D one of the first systems? For role playing. If people were like copying the D&D system, I'll bet they didn't know how to make something less complex, right? Early on, I mean, they're like, this is what exists. Let's clone this and make a different theme on this cool thing. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but it seems like that would make sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, when D&D first came out, it was revolutionary. There was nothing happening like that, and there wasn't video games, really.
Good point.
It was like a completely new thing. So, it makes sense, like you said, to just kind of clone that in a way, copy it, and like change the theme a little bit.
Well, so dude, you played it early, right? Did you play it when it first came out, pretty much?
I think it came out in like 78. So I was
okay. Well, but did you deal with like the satanic panic and that kind of that kind of nonsense? Were your parents like, you can't play this game, or
no, my parents didn't care, but
they worship the devil anyway, right? So
yeah, of course. No, one of my friends actually, his mom was like, nope, you can't play that. She found out we were playing it. She's like, nope, it's like you're gonna cast spells or whatever, raise
right. You're gonna summon something from
the
bowels of hell. No way.
So it was a real thing, man.
Yeah, you experienced that. That's crazy. Were you just kind of like, whatever, this is stupid? Like, come on.
I didn't really even think about it. It was just a fun thing that was just imaginative, and like there was movies around at the same time that were fantasy based. It was like just fit,
Yeah.
So totally immersed.
So Jeremy, are you playing with like the same group a lot, or are you playing with different people sometimes?
I just do everything online now.
Okay.
So I have a core group, and then occasionally I'll get involved with some other gaming through ICRPG, Broomhammer stuff, and that's new people. And then there are other games that I play, other guys that run other games that I play in that I get to play with other people too. So it's kind of a big mix, and it's always changing.
Do you enjoy the GMing more or the being a player more, would you say?
I like both.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, there's
switch hitter, eh?
Yeah, I really like playing, just for the character development aspect of it, interaction with other players. But the creative end of it for running the games, setting up the games is cool too. I really like that.
So when did you decide, like, I want to make my own system? Grit is what I want. Like, when did you decide that? Because there's a lot of systems now, right? Like, you really enjoy index card RPG. You've told me a lot about that. You've gotten me into that. I'm actually going to start running some of those.
That's awesome.
Which I cannot wait. With your help, I'll do that for sure. But like, what made you say, okay, enough of that. I could do this on my own. I could do this.
Well, the seeds were actually planted I planted my own seeds back in the mid '90s.
Okay.
And high school, just I was thinking about those things, but it just never materialized until kind of 2012, where a buddy of mine was like, "Yeah, man, we got to get games together again. Start doing it." And then D&D came up, and I started doing some research, and it's like, this is just
Too much.
Yeah, and I was the one who was going to run it, so I was like, I just can't do this. It's too complicated. I don't want to deal with all this stuff as the DM. So maybe it's time for me to like start looking at designing my own stuff. So I tried to run a game of basic D&D where I just hacked it, and it almost was very close to ICRPG actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so after that experience, I kind of like started thinking about doing my own thing, and that was like around 2015 or so.
Yeah.
Well, that's been like the nice thing about my experience, my first time GMing, is that most of the players have been playing D&D, so that's like we don't have to get over the rules hump of like trying to get into it. And and that's where like a system like yours or other simple systems are so if you're walking up to an experience where nobody knows the rules, then you almost need a what are they called, like one-page RPGs or whatever. Like one time I played Everyone is John. That's like a front and back, where all the players are different personalities of this guy who has split personalities.
God,
and
that's cool. That's cool.
GM plays everyone else, right? And then like if John fails a check, then the personalities can fight to take over, and they all are like completely different, right? So you're always like fighting for control of John. And you could play that around a campfire. You need like 1d6 to play that.
Man, how creative does that sound?
Cool.
That's so cool, man. I want to play that.
Yeah, I want to try some of those too.
It was just like the experience. You said, "Hey, do you want to come try my game?" And we're like, "Sure." And we could show up, and you explained how to play it, and then we played it, and we played it competently. Like we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of cool things, and we still were able to embody fantasy archetypes, right? We got to be the quick ranger, and there was the magic user, and there was the big fighter. Like that stuff was there, but it just was like you just get up and go, like instantly. I really liked that about it.
Yeah, thanks, man. And that's what I was going for too. Just easy to get into it. 10 minutes to tell you about it before we go in, and then you just kind of learn as you go. And that doesn't take long at all,
It was really my intro into any kind of RPGing. I played a one-shot of D&D with you, Jeremy, if you remember, many years ago, and it was terrible. There was just so many people in that game, and it was just I didn't understand what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
And then when we played that with you just a couple months ago, it sparked this kind of thing in me where I said this. I was just like, I could do this. This is something I think I could do. And that drove me to like, okay, what system can I use? Like, I want to do something with my family, because what I liked the most about it, to Ben's point, was we just you told us the rules in 10 minutes, and then here we go. And then we're playing, and it seemed meaningful. You had this like bare bones story. Almost, I kind of liked the fact that we kind of didn't know anything. I kind of liked that. We were just like, okay, we're a group together. There's these giant flying bugs in the air that are attacking us. We got to like, okay, we're thrust into this combat encounter. And there's this woman. I don't know if you remember this, Ben, but I remember I was like holding the hand of this like woman, and she was like passed out. And I was like, what? Like, and you were kind of like, okay, what do you do? And I was like, I don't know. I'm gonna. Can I wake her up? I'm gonna smack her in the face and wake her up, And it's like, okay, I succeeded, and I was like, yes, I rolled really well. Tree. Yeah, and he was like, well, she kind of rouses, but she's fucked. Basically, she's drugged to shit. It was like, what does that mean? And I thought that was so good. And then we got to this next thing, and we're like running with her, and then she turns into this demon and then attacks us, and then we had to like escape that. And it was just like, that wasn't. I mean, how long did that take you to prep for, Jeremy?
Usually it takes me 3 hours. If I do a 3-hour session, is 3 hours.
Okay, so you do this thing in 3 hours, and the feelings and the emotions and the story that gave me is lasting forever. You know what I mean? That 3-hour thing has spurned this love of mine to continue to do it. And
awesome.
I guess maybe that's another reason, Ben, why I'm enjoying the simple rule set, is because that was kind of the first thing that hooked me that I saw.
Yeah.
You know, maybe if I had played D&D, and Jeremy was the DM, and we played, maybe I would have been like, I have to get this. You know, that could be part of why I like it so much. I don't know. But Jeremy, let me ask you this. What do you think you lose from going from something complex to something simple, if anything? What do you think you lose? Like, you have the 1 to 5 sessions that you're playing. You thrust us into the situation, and it's so much fun. But do you have in your mind anything that is not as good about a simple rule set, or something that you're sacrificing to get these other things?
Well, personally, I don't feel like I lose anything, but I've already gone through the process of playing complex games, you know? So I have different needs as a player, actually, or a game master. But I think if you're somebody that really relishes details and the minutia of keeping track of things, and like the progression of a character that you kind of can predictably see forthcoming through a story arc, then you might have a difficult time going into a more simple system. If you really relish those things, you know.
Sure.
But what happens is when you go into a more simple system is you kind of lose all the extra keeping track of stuff. And to me, it's more liberating. But
Yeah,
again,
you
right.
Kind of play. Let's just play.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
and not worry about all that.
and, go
What
ahead.
you're saying kind of been making me. I was kind of asking if you play with all the same people or who you play with, because I do feel like what you're saying is you need to find the right group, right? Because a lot of times, otherwise, I feel like with my group anyway, probably especially, there's a balance between the dungeon master wanting the game to be as simple as possible because they have to do all the work to get it ready, and the players wanting it almost like as complex as possible, but because we play long campaigns, so they feel like they're getting somewhere, right? All those rules are like giving them stuff. And wherever you can find the balance of like, I want stuff that I'm trying to get with, I want to just be able to tell a story, and wherever those two things meet, you know, it all depends on what the kind of players you have, I think.
Yeah, and I think that predictability, some people just really need that, and that's totally okay. But I think you can play a long story arc with a simple game. It's just about letting go as a player of those predictable things, right?
Yeah, like
You-
almost
you-
like character development instead of like character sheet development.
Exactly.
You
It's
bring up a
less-
good point, though, when you say that you kind of. So you talked about it being a little more liberating, and you talked about somebody maybe needing the more deterministic rule set in a complex system. I wonder if is a simpler rule set almost sometimes a little scarier in
I
a
think-
way, because
think
you
so.
don't have all the stuff to latch onto to kind of use as a crutch.
Right.
Crutch is the wrong word, but to like fall back to. Like, okay, I know I'm going to cast this spell, and here's the stats that this spell does, and this is what I can do with it. So it takes a little bit of the pressure off me, to
Exactly.
have to come up with a way to use a magic crystal. Like in Grit, Jeremy doesn't have an actual magic system. Tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here. But what we had in this game that we played was I was the magic user, and I had these 3 elemental crystals shards, basically. And Jeremy basically said, okay, these have magical properties. I'm not going to tell you what, there's no like, this is this spell. There's not a fire spell. But what you have is you have a crystal imbued with this fire element. And whatever you can decide to use with it, based on that, is kind of up to you. And I loved that. I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, I can do anything I want with this fucking thing. That's amazing. I could use it as, a blowtorch, or I could just like make it emanate heat and keep us all warm if we got cold. You know what I mean? It's like anything I could think of to use it for, I kind of could. And then once you use it, it's spent. But I guess I could see somebody who's like, I don't want that. I want you to tell me what this fire crystal does exactly, so I can min-max it and use it to its potential.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, you see that in D&D. Like everything is spelled out in all the spells, right? There's no real thinking about it as long as you know the rules of it. The unfortunate thing is that there's a million spells, so you kind of have to master, what those spells are.
Well, and I think that's the counter argument, right? So in the chat here, Janelle put what her husband says, and he said, complicated systems give you more tools for creativity or for hanging yourself, so that when you have those hard-earned victories, that you strategically manipulated the written rules to help you overcome a challenge. Like there is some victory there similar to solving a puzzle or playing a board game, right? Or playing a tactical war game. It's not a storytelling victory. It's like a, it's like a board gaming victory, and you get to do that within the game. And some people like that. Like I like that. My group likes that, right? That's sort of the counter argument.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's totally cool. It's totally cool. I mean, it's just all about preference, right? Some people like that. That's that fills their need for their gaming experience. That's cool.
And I mean, there could also exist both, right? You don't just have to have one or the other. Because I'm excited as well. Every time Ben tells me about here's what I did, I can't wait to hear his session report and then try to give him feedback of ask him questions about what he did or what he's going to do next or what's coming up or who was being a PAB and all. I love hearing all of that stuff. It's like my favorite thing, and that's all. I wouldn't probably get that kind of stuff if it wasn't so complex, because he comes to me and he's got, I have an issue. How do I figure this out? This is what I'm struggling with. And if it was a simple rule set, he could just be like, I'm just going to do this. But I can tell, Ben, that it's probably more fun for you to figure it out, to get better. Because it seems like from what you were saying before, you just want to be as good as you can possibly be at something for yourself.
Well, it's a tightrope, though. I agree, 100%. I agree, and it's a blast right now. But Jeremy, you said you ran complicated games. You played complicated games. I'm running my first complicated game, and it's fun. But definitely, there could come a point where 1 week I don't want to figure out the combat encounters, and I'm burnt out, and I want to break. And when you're playing a system like D&D, you can't just throw a session together, especially once you get to higher levels. You can't just throw a bad guy out there. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to be. It would be pointless if there wasn't any thought behind it. And right now I do like that. I keep trying to outsmart the players, and they immediately counter everything I throw at them. They are better at this than I am.
Well, I mean,
no
there's
question.
6 or what? Is there 5 player characters?
5 players,
and you got all 5 brains working against your one brain, and your one brain is brand new.
Take about 5 seconds for them to figure me out. So.
I think I think you mentioned before, Ben, is that is stacked in the player's favor, the character's favor. The mechanics of the game it makes them very easy to overpower stuff, I think.
And it should be, right? They're not supposed to roll into every combat and die. There's supposed to be some times that their life is truly threatened, their character life. But most of the combats should win. That's how it's designed to work. They're the heroes.
Some of the best combat is the ones that you lose.
Yeah.
Talk about that, Jeremy. Talk a little more about that. You've said that before, and it always scares me. Because I'm like, I don't want to die in a combat. I want to live. But in a simpler rule set, this might not be so bad, right? Because it's all about servicing this one story for this one encounter. Can you talk about how death works within this simple rule set?
Well, it may not be so much about the simplicity or complexity, but I have stuff baked into Grit that's helpful when characters die. But I think it's all about the players that you have at the table, and if they're on the same page with the lethality of the game.
Yeah.
But I think that as far as the story goes, if you have characters that die in combat, it can be a really great storytelling experience, right?
Sure.
Because if other characters survive, who else? What do they do afterwards? You know?
Right. Yeah.
And who joins them? It's just a way of kind of continuing the story.
Well, and don't you have something in the rule set of Grit that allows for some really cool moment to happen when if someone dies, so they don't feel like, well, fuck, I'm just out of it now?
It's called Blaze of Glory. So basically, when you die and you miss your save for your death save, basically, you get one final action of heroic, dramatic heroic action.
Yeah.
So basically, your rolls are maxed out for that, and you just do one cool thing, and then you're gone.
Blaze of Glory.
Yeah,
That's cool.
That's so cool.
I've had characters die because it's a little bit brutal sometimes.
Well,
And-
plus if they know that's coming, if they know that's in the rules, they might be like, it's okay if I die. I could win it for us.
right,
And then I die at the same time.
Yeah, it's usually clutch at the end, like with the last bad guy that they're fighting. It'll be like up to the last.
Man, that's a cool
thing.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's cool. It works good for one shots and short arcs and stuff. So
I think Ryan said it right though. I am afraid of killing player characters. Being new to the I don't want to break anybody's heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Agreed.
there has to be some there has to be
Fear,
some
at
consequences. There has to be
Right.
fear on the players. Yeah, look, Quinn, do it, you coward. Dang it, Quinn.
All right, he's getting
Fine.
it first. The
You're getting
bard.
killed
The
first.
bard is gone. Is he the bard?
No, he plays it's called a spell dancer. It's
Oh,
like
a spell
custom
dancer.
class. It's like a sorcerer kind of. But
Do it, coward.
yeah, anyone but Kenna, exactly. I have not pulled punches to not kill people, right? But the thing is that the Dungeon Master's power is infinite. Like, there is no limit to what we can send against the players, and so finding the right balance of this is going to be, when the time is necessary, when the combats should be hard, when it's the big bad, when it's the final boss, when it's the whatever. It should feel challenging, and it should like skirt real close. But you're almost like you're designing with no play testing,
Right. Right.
And you're right. For storytelling, player character deaths can be good. And the thing that gets scary as a DM are like, we have 2 new players in our group. These are their first characters they've ever played. I don't want to kill them. I don't know how they would
Yeah.
react. If somebody killed my character, I might be mad for a few minutes, and then I'll roll up a new one, or we'll figure out a way to revive me, or we'll do something, whatever. Like, I'm there for the story, but I don't know. I don't know how the players are going to react. I know how I would react, but it's not happening to me.
Plus, can't we kind of fold that into a simple versus complex thing if we talk about the meaning of the death in a complex system of somebody who has spent so much time developing their character versus the meaning of a death in a simpler system of somebody who hasn't spent that time building their character. So they might have a different feeling of what the death actually means, right? Like we talked about in something like Grit, it can be, wow, how cool this could be because I can do this really kick-ass thing at the end to possibly get us out of this situation. And I don't have so much attachment to my character necessarily because I didn't spend days and, hours and hours coming up with him and crafting him and honing him and building him up, because you don't really level up, I'm assuming, right? There's not a leveling up system. Where in a more complex system you have spent time, right, pouring into every little minuscule detail, and then now he dies and you feel a sense of loss, right? It's probably a different feeling, I would guess.
I think the loss would be more of time spent building up the mechanics behind the character. Whereas with a simple system, you don't have the mechanics that you're worrying about so much. It's more the character itself.
Yeah.
So I think it might be a more of an emotional thing with the simpler system.
Okay.
Having a character die. Maybe not, but
No, sure.
it's just like there's not mechanics behind it that you've invested. It's more time rounding out your character in a more narrative sense. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I could see it go either way. I could see it that if all of your development of your character is in their character development, and now that person dies, you spend a lot of time becoming that person. But Ryan, your point's good too. A lot of times D&D campaigns go on very long. If you had been playing for a year and then you die, and nobody else did,
that would suck. No,
nobody, But now you're the hero. You held the bridge so they could get away, and then, because everybody was going to lose. Everyone was going to lose that combat.
Unless Sir Knifeus of Poop sacrificed himself.
The paladin of
West Kingdom.
See, I see D&D as really making it so that characters, the survivability is built into it, into the complexity of it.
I see. Yeah.
There's ways to heal. Like, everyone has spells. There's a lot of ways to kind of
keep yourself alive.
Go around, getting killed off.
Well, and the deeper you get in, the higher level you get, the easier it is to revive somebody who died.
Exactly. And also what I see too with complex systems is the characters become more complex, and also what you encounter is complex. It's it kind of just goes up in the same kind of ratio.
Right. Well, I know I've looked at some of the high CR monsters that I would like, this would be a good boss, and then I could think, this is going to be impossible to run. He's got 50 abilities.
Right.
I'd have to study this before the combat encounter.
Exactly. Man, the more we're talking about this, it just definitely seems two concepts that exist in both systems would feel orders of magnitude different. And I think that's really interesting. Especially as we talk about something like death to characters, or just being your character. I like the idea of a short narrative arc, and you're just along for the ride. The ride is everything. Where maybe in a more complex system, you are, like Ben said, you are this character, and I am going through possibly years. Right? Possibly years in real time with this character. And my experiences doing the same things are vastly different. And I can see really enjoying both of those. Right now, I am only drawn to the simple, like the idea of doing like a 3-session arc with you, Jeremy, and Grit sounds, I'm getting palpitate. My whole body is palpitating. Yeah, I want that so bad. Let me switch though, Jeremy, and ask you this question.
Sure.
What advice would you have to a first-time role player? So Ben and I are new. Ben's not really a first-time role player, but he's a first-time DM. Well, but what advice would you give to a first-time role player looking to get into a certain system? How would you recommend they begin? How would you recommend they start?
As a player or as a game master?
Do it with a game master first, actually. That's kind of what the show's about.
Sure, of course. So what I would say is go online. I know that a lot of people want to do the in-person kind of thing, but it's so easy to find people to learn from online. Okay. So I would choose a system, and I would highly recommend ICRPG.
There it is.
Highly recommend it.
How come?
It's an elegant system. It's everything that I wanted D&D to be. Like, when this came out in 2018, I was working on Grit. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I want. This is what I'm designing. And then that stopped me from working on Grit for many years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for a number of
years. You're
like,
like, this person already did it.
Dang it.
So Hank is a brilliant guy. But anyway, there's a forum for this game, forums, and a Discord channel if you follow Patreon, where you can hook up with people, and they'll run you through a game. So I think it's really good to get 2 or 3 games under your belt. It doesn't matter what game system it is. Just
as a player. As a player. Be a player first. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Just play it from that perspective, and that way you kind of get the general, meat and potatoes of the system, like how it actually works, and then you can go in and, buy your book, and read through the Game Master section. Get going on that. ICRPG is really easy to pick up, and there's a lot of great advice in the book on the Game Master stuff. D&D is a little more convoluted, but it's the player's handbook that you have to go for that. For the
which I thought was
basic stuff.
weird. There is a DM guide, right? But the
It is.
rules to play the game are in the player's handbook. Isn't that right?
You could run the game without the DM's guide. I'm not an expert on 5e or anything, but I think you could basically run the whole game with just the player's handbook. I think the DM's guide just gives you extra stuff.
Okay, tips.
Yeah, I think it's more like how to figure out what stuff should cost, how to build a combat encounter, how to make a monster lair, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and so just take some time to, read through the books or whatever you've chosen. And then, you can also go to local game store. They usually run in-person games, especially
really?
D&D.
Okay.
Yeah, there's drop-in games sometimes. So you could get into a game as a player and maybe even post as a GM if you wanted to try that out. So there's options there, but online it's so much easier to get other people from with the right schedule to get a game in.
Plus, I could see if you're someone who's a little bit more leery of, or a little more nervous of gaming, especially an RPG that you have never played before, could be scary, right? And now you're at a table with a bunch of people. So I could see online being a pretty good system to, okay, I'm alone, I'm behind my screen. I watched, you don't have to necessarily be on camera, right? If you're doing Discord.
Right.
So that's okay. That's some good advice.
Or, play with your closest friends or family. That's always a thing, like you're doing, Ryan. It's an easy way to get in without feeling like you're going to be judged or anything, or let anybody down. They're going to be more easier on you, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to be, or else they don't get dessert. So what are the perks then, would you say, of a simpler system?
Perks?
Yeah, like simpler system versus complex system. If you're going to recommend one to somebody, like I want to recommend the simpler system. Here's the perks. Here's why you should play a simpler system over a complex system.
Well, one of the first things really is there's less to learn. There's less to have to remember. It's easier to pick up. So it's just going to be out of the gate a lot less work on your end to just kind of know how the thing works. And also, jumping on YouTube, you can always pick up videos and stuff and look at those. You have more narrative space, more creative room for improv kind of stuff. And also during the games, you're going to have less time that you're going to need to like check rules and stuff like that. Because that always
you bring up a good point. Like I feel like I want to play some more simpler games on the side just as a chance to practice improv, to practice play in a simpler, looser system, be forced to make stuff up and not rely on a rule book or a character sheet. And then that'll make me better at all. That'll make me better at all RPGs.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good way to do it.
Well, Ben, now it's funny you say that. So I am on stream. I'm going to be doing some index card RPG sessions, and it would be awesome if you hopped in and even potentially took the reins for one. You run one. It's so simple. The rule set Jeremy was talking about is so simple, and you just hop in and then you just try anything you want out on us. Poor unsuspecting gamers that you can then take and use in your 5th edition. I would love that so much. Work out your stuff on us.
Well, Ryan, we're gonna have to talk off stream about this. But that sounds cool.
Heck yes. I want to. I just keep palpitating. Okay, so all right, Jeremy. Then what are the perks then of a more complex system? If you say I want you to start with a complex system, here's why you would do that.
0, none.
Personally, I've got to say there's not much for me there, but I'm going to say that
you're not biased. You're not biased or anything.
No, but like I said, I've been through it. Like I've been gaming for 40 years with it, so I've had time to like soak that all in and experience it, and I just know it's not for me.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just that complex rules are bad. It's just personally, that's just
Yeah,
how I
it's
feel.
not your bag, baby.
Yeah, but I would say that if you're somebody that really, like I've already said, if you really like nitty-gritty details and you're like more tactical about your gaming and stuff, and you have that interest, I think that's the way to go.
I find it weird now that everybody I play with is an engineer and we like complex systems. Are those two things correlated?
Interesting.
I think so.
Yeah, that's true.
Man.
Jeremy and I are anything but an engineers.
Yeah, math, no.
Are all the guys in your group, is everybody that plays in your group, Ben, are they all engineers?
Everybody is. I
Wow.
wonder if Stephanie is. I don't know what she does exactly.
That's telling.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
But I would say also that predictable progression is another thing that I mentioned before, but just knowing that your character is going to follow an arc and that you're going to
Yeah.
predictably understand what's going to kind of happen as far as powers and abilities and stuff like that.
Right, you do lose some sort of, like I said, leveling up kind of in a simple rule set, right? I mean, I do Tiny Dungeon, and you don't really, there's no leveling up in there necessarily. You get loot that kind of makes you stronger. You get more loot and stuff that it kind of has it's like a faux leveling system, but it's not like you're increasing. I guess you can't. There are slight other leveling systems in it, but it's not like a D&D where it's like, oh man, I went from now I get all these level 3 spells
Right.
to pick from. Like that, I guess you could potentially miss.
Yeah. I mean, ICRPG has milestone type stuff that you get to select things like, but they're usually just loot items, but sometimes abilities. But yeah, some of the more simple systems are not going to have that built in, which for me, it's fine. It's just more organic. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's all in what you like. But I think the complex systems really do that well. They have everything laid out for you. So there's no question about how things are going to kind of go for your character. So
Something to look forward to sometimes, too.
yeah, definitely.
All right, Jeremy. I want you to, if you want to, can you divulge anything about the RPG system that you are designing called Grit? Can you go into any detail? If you don't want to, screw us.
I don't want to go into like mechanics so much, I
Sure.
think, but it's it's just a combination of everything that I've experienced in RPGs, and it's a game that I want to play and run, and it's it's fewer stats to deal with as far as the characters are concerned. It's a single die that you roll. And you have
D20, right?
D12. You have
D12,
a pool of dice that kind of can be used to kind of perk some skills that you have. Loot or stuff that your character uses during the game is very simple. You're only allowed to carry 10 items. And the combat is just very quick because it's more of opposed roll type thing, like action reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably twice as fast as any other system I've run. And prepping is a breeze. Like this is basically one page is one session.
Really?
Oh, that's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's
And am I right to assume there's no you're not creating any settings for people?
settings. What do you mean?
It's just a rule system, and I create the world. I create where I'm playing in.
Right. I'm gonna
Is that
have
right?
I'm gonna have a builder built in, so you can
Oh.
randomly generate stuff. So a lot of what I'm doing is building in these tags into the system. So you're gonna be able to generate tags for scenes, scenarios, and rooms, basically. So you just be able to roll 4d20, and you've got four words that kind of dictate.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah, so I'm trying to keep the prep down for GMs, like, so you can just like hammer through it, and
Yeah, you can
in
just
no
kind
time.
of go.
Right.
Interesting.
Let's
Yeah.
just get going. Yeah.
You could even
mean-
hypothetically just do it on the fly.
Yes, I actually do it that way a lot.
Really?
Yeah, I've got a system down with the monsters that I could take any monster and power level it in tiers instantaneously.
Oh, nice.
So I could take, if it's a goblin adventure, basically I can have different levels of those just coming out that have different abilities and strengths and weaknesses. Behind the scenes kind of the game is a lot of the GM side of it. I'm like designing it from the GM's perspective to make it easy for you to run a game of it. Because that, having run the games most of my life and not being a player, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. You're making it for the GM.
Right.
Yeah.
So most of the games that I play, even if it's ICRPG or most of the games that I run, I spend more time picking out images than I do actually writing mechanics of what's going to happen.
For sure.
Yeah. So I'll spend hours on pictures and 20 minutes.
Well, and that tracks too, because if you guys don't know this, Jeremy's also a very talented artist.
Oh, thanks,
so that it tracks that a lot of that is what you look for.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hide in my numbers.
I just don't have the math mind, man.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Yeah. No, me neither, dude. I don't either. I feel stupid on the regular. A lot of times, that's actually another reason why I think I enjoy Tiny Dungeon is I don't have to really worry about mathing anything out. I just kind of just go based on feeling and creativity, and then it just kind of goes from there. What feels cool in the moment? What's cool? What is the rule of cool, right? That's what I love about it as well.
And the cool thing about it too is how do you decipher the role? You could do that in D&D for sure, but like for a simple system like Tiny Dungeon, what does that role look like in the game? So there's a lot you can do with just that. It doesn't have to be the numbers.
True.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
And I think that's what you find more in the simpler games. Is just more of that narrative kind of description of what happens.
That makes sense. I think there's definitely a place, and I want to be playing both. I want to be playing both.
Yeah, I do too. And I want to join your sessions, Ben. I want to be like a fly on the wall at least while you're playing.
Come on, roll up a character.
Get
We'll
in
find
there.
you
Hell
in the
yeah,
swamp.
man! I'd love to. And then you got to come over and play some Tiny Dungeon with me. No, but I think we'll marry the two, ICRPG and Grit, kind of right in the middle of both of those, and we'll get those going.
Sure.
And have a good time with that. And Jeremy, I really want to play more Grit with you. And just learn as much as I can. We're going to have to get somebody who's more biased towards the complex system, I think, on an episode coming up here, so we can get the counterpoint to Jeremy's simple rule set skew. But dude, on behalf of Ben and me, we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
What a great discussion this has been.
Has been.
Yeah, real treat. Thanks for coming on, Jeremy.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, dude. All right, we'll talk soon.
Over and out.
Wraps up our show for this month. If you are listening to this on audio and want to see a video version, you can go look on the Day Night Dice YouTube channel. There is a save of this live VOD. If you want to watch us live, tune in the second Wednesday of every month on Twitch on Day Night Dice, and you can ask questions to our guests and us, and we will answer them terribly, and we'll get some real answers from our guests. So until next time, we'll see you later.
Goodbye.